how does one start with Karan Thapar? Just say, hello and welcome. Karan, but really I think it's an honor to be interviewing you at the end of the year without any rancor, without any complaints, but with a lot of suggestions from friends. Oh, you will interview Karan Thapar, sock it to him. Well, that's your style, isn't it? Does it just come naturally, or is it contrived? Is it a strategy? What is it?
Well, the truth is I'm not a belligerent human being. I come across as a bit of a Rakshas, but I often say to people, Shakal Rakshas jaisi hai, niyat nahi. I suppose when I'm asking questions, what lies at the back of my mind is if a question is worth asking, it's worth ensuring it gets a proper answer. And I think it's disrespect to the audience if you ask a question and accept what is clearly a prevarication or an evasion. So then I become persistent and determined. I hope I'm firm and insistent, but not rude.
Well, you're not rude, but you certainly push a person to the wall. And in your search for a perfect answer, or as you said, the right answer, sometimes you don't get it. You paraphrase the poor guy, and then you say, well, I think that's what you mean. Now, now the person has to hold back and say, huh? No, I don't mean that, or do I mean that? And you're actually by then asking the person of the next person. Now, that's executing a guy without giving him a chance.
Well, that's one way of looking at it, but the other is this. When a person is reluctant to give you the answer which you know for a fact is the truth, but he can't admit it because it might be embarrassing or it might be too revealing, then one way of getting out of pushing him and not getting an answer is to say, look, the honest truth is this is what you're trying to say, isn't it? And occasionally, it bounces the person into accepting it, partly because he's dropped his guard, partly because perhaps he's a bit fed up of having to resist and this is the easiest way out. But it does get to the nub.
I know, but you realize that's the death warrant as well. It could be.
Well, it's not intended by me to be, but at the end of the day, if you're doing an interview and you're a politician and you're accountable to the country, then I assume that you too want to give honest answers to the extent you can. I'm pushing you perhaps a little bit further than you want to go. Your job is to resist and give as little as you can. There's a sort of innate, inbuilt tension.
Okay, two power play questions then. One, how many such executions have you caused, and have you been to the funeral as well?
I've never caused an execution, therefore I've never needed to go to the funeral. I don't think I've ever left an interview where the interviewee has been so upset that he would have perhaps snapped relations with me.
But you've certainly made them upset enough to leave your interview. And I could think of at least two people who walked out or thrown your mics and said, this is it, the interview is over. Now, isn't that true?
Well, yes, one in particular was Narendra Modi. That interview lasted, I think, from memory, about three and a half minutes, and he insisted that he was going to end it. He didn't want to do any more. Most people, because they're critical of Mr. Modi, actually praised me for it. But I will tell you one thing, that if an interviewee walks out, then there's a sense in which the interviewer has also failed. Your job is to get answers, not get people to leave and walk away. So it's not a complete success when they walk away, but when a person like Narendra Modi does, the world is kind and they end up praising you and blaming him.
Okay, tell me something. Now, and this is not just Karan Thapar alone, but Karan Thapar is part of the new media movement, the age of accountability, the age of transparency, the age in which accountability stops at the media. No accountability for the media. Does Karan Thapar actually share these views? Is Karan Thapar part of that movement? Is Karan Thapar aware that media can be irresponsible? And of course, a lot of the media is good and responsible. But what are your views on that?
Well, I want to answer that in two parts. First of all, when Karan Thapar asks questions, particularly when he's pursuing a particular argument from the opposite end of the interviewee, that doesn't mean to say those are Karan's own views. Karan is simply playing devil's advocate. He's therefore taking a line opposite to Salman Khurshid's or Arun Jaitley's or Sitaram Yechury's, because that's the style of interview he's doing. That's not an indication of what Karan himself believes in. Your second question is a bigger, wider one. I do believe that the media needs to be more accountable. I do believe that the media has serious problems that it must accept. In fact, one of the shows I do on CNN IBN is called The Last Word, which is an attempt to be introspective and honest about the media and to discuss its lapses and its faults. And whether it was the involvement of journalists in Radiagate, which was such a big story last year, or the exaggerated and one-sided reporting by practically the entire media in April and again in August when Anna first flared up. Those were issues that I raised in a substantial way there. I think the media perhaps needs to be more transparent about itself, more critical about itself, and more willing to accept from others criticism. If we criticize, we must be prepared to be criticized as well. And sometimes I accept the media is defensive, sometimes it's not as open and honest about itself. And those are lapses that I would readily acknowledge, not just of the media as a whole, but of myself. I sometimes bristle when people are aggressively critical of me. I know that they're probably right. No one likes to take it, and so I admire politicians usually when they face criticism with sang-froid.
Well, I've heard the expression "dog doesn't eat dog" too often about the media. I mean, do you put? I mean, you put us in the dog, but do you put the media in the dog? You get somebody your seniority, maybe higher seniority than yours, and put them in the dock and say, look, there are a few things I'm going to ask you, and would you paraphrase their answers in the same manner?
If I could get them to sit in a chair in front of me with the promptness and readiness with which you or a Kapil Sibal or an Arun Jaitley or a Sitaram Yechuri always agree to interviews, I would happily put my most senior colleagues, as you call it, in the dock. And I'll be honest with you, when Radiagate happened, I tried very hard to get the two senior journalists who were at the center of that storm to accept to be interviewed, either one-to-one on Devil's Advocate or to be part of a discussion on The Last Word. Unfortunately, neither of those two accepted. And I do think that senior journalists, if they're going to put politicians or businessmen or other people in the dock, must be prepared to be similarly questioned when there are question marks about them. Sadly, it didn't happen then. I suspect, and this is sad, but I suspect quite often journalists don't make themselves accountable in the way in which they look to make others accountable. And if that is double standards, I'd have to acknowledge there is a certain double standard in our fraternity.
Well, so shouldn't you then be doing a program called Double Standards?
Well, I'm doing a program called The Last Word where those double standards are explored and done every Friday evening. And it's done with other journalists. And there are senior journalists like N. Ram of The Hindu, or Vinod Sharma of the Hindustan Times, or Shobna Bhartia of the Hindustan Times, who have been equally critical of the profession and have accepted that we need to be more open and more transparent.
Okay, tell me, if you can, not just only this year, but over a longer span, your best and your worst.
In terms of interviewees?
Interviewees and the feel, the sense. These days we are all into sense of the house, sense of the people, sense of the media. So just tell me, the sense of Karan Thapar, the best and the worst.
I'll tell you, I won't name names because that would be invidious and wrong.
Okay.
But I think a good interview, which leaves you feeling satisfied, is one where you know you've engaged with the interviewee at an intellectual level with the subject. Either you've relaxed him sufficiently for him to say or her to say things which otherwise wouldn't have come out, and so a real truth has emerged which perhaps would not have been available to the audience otherwise, or there's been a good clash of wits and intelligence, and maybe you haven't revealed anything new, but you've discussed the thing like a sort of jousting match, which is also very entertaining. And the second, in some ways, is more challenging because you have to be completely alert. You're matching yourself in terms of intelligence, in terms of language, in terms of quickness of mind and delivery, and that's very satisfying. But it makes for an entertaining interview.
Okay, Karan, I'm going to follow you and say at this point of time, don't go away, a short break, and I'll be back. So good to have you back, Karan, and I hope the audience is back as well, not bored to death.
Do you think we've frightened them away?
Anyway, now what I want to ask you is, this is the age of institution building. You know, we are in the process of getting a big, huge new institution called the Lokpal. There are regulators being appointed galore. There are issues of transparency, accountability. People are now talking about right to recall, right to reject as far as the electoral system is concerned. Now, let me just ask you this. When you play part of an important pillar of democracy, as part of media, do you have a philosophy? Is it that you also wish and want and would willingly help develop an institution? Or are you just like the demolition squad? Whatever you see must come down by the evening, whether it's a man, woman, or an institution.
No, I don't think journalists ought to be demolition squads. Obviously, a fairly important part of what journalists do is to demolish hype, to expose humbug, to reveal the truths that others don't want revealed, and that often looks and is interpreted to be the work of a demolition squad. But in fact, it's much more than that. But there is another aspect to journalism, which is to stand up and to highlight important aspects that haven't been understood, which are good. One of the things that I believe journalists ought to do, and perhaps don't do as much of, is to go into the details of issues. FDI in retail is a perfect example. I think so much of the government's case for FDI in retail would have been made by journalists had more ministers been willing to come up and try and sell the concept to the country. But in the absence of ministers coming up and batting for it, what happened was that when you did get hold of the one or two, you spent your time actually doing the opposite, to saying, why haven't you people been talking? Why is your timing so bad? Why haven't you been consulting Mamta? Why haven't you got your allies on board? And those questions were important questions because they exposed the lack of preparedness. But because more ministers weren't willing, no one got around to selling the concept. And that's one reason why I think FDI in retail stumbled, because not enough people were there selling to the country the incredible advantages that will be conferred on farmers, on urban consumers, and the fact that if there is a community that would perhaps have question marks, it's a small 12% trader community, and even there the question marks may not be real and substantive. But which minister came out to give interviews? So if they were there, that positive aspect would have been part of journalism.
Well, if you want to know why they don't come, we go back to what I said earlier. They don't come because, sorry, you don't inspire a lot of you enough confidence to in them for them to feel that we are really going not before a firing squad. We're actually going in front of people who are inquisitive, who want to help, who would be like us and who perhaps would want to support these ideas. Sometimes you get an impression that anything that you want to do is going to be scrutinized in a critical manner, but not a very helpful manner. So a media man is a doctor, just cut you up, look at things, stitch you up again. Or is a media man someone who really cares about the patient?
Well, a media man's a surgeon, but not a butcher. A butcher will hack you. A surgeon will carefully cut you up with a purpose in mind. I think critical scrutiny is necessary, and I'm sure all politicians, you in particular, would accept it. But yes, if politicians feel that there is an animus against them, that this is not just curiosity and a desire to find out more, but actually to string them up and cut them down, then I can understand. And that perhaps also suggests a failure in the critical relationship between journalists and politicians. And if that failure is there, then some of the blame has to vest with journalists. I'll readily accept that. I hope that most people I interview don't think that's true of me. There will be some, obviously, who do.
Well, fortunately, I don't, and that's the reason why I'm here. Otherwise, I certainly would have interviewed you, because you would have thought there's a conflict of interest. This guy is going to get back at me. But one important question, what is it that makes you people get into politics? The thin dividing line between being objectively questioning politicians and then quietly slipping across that line and getting into politics. Why does that happen?
Well, I don't think it should. And I think the relationship between a journalist and a politician is an interesting and intriguing one. No doubt there is a affinity between them because they both get involved in the same subjects. There is a natural interest between them because politicians want to use journalists to put their view across, and journalists need politicians because that's the subject matter that they deal in. But that said and done, they are always technically on the opposite side of the divide. Politicians are doers, journalists are questioners. Politicians run the country, we question the way it's being run, or try and reveal in greater detail strengths and weaknesses. Therefore, there's a dividing line between them, and yet there is an affinity as well. And that's what makes for the essential tension in that relationship. You can be friends, but you can be adversaries, and both at the same time.
So you'd agree that a politician journalist or a journalist politician is an inherent contradiction?
In most people, yes. There are one or two who can walk that tightrope and do it pretty brilliantly without falling on either side. But yes, it has to be. And by the way, when journalists stop being journalists and become politicians, which they have, of course, a complete and total fundamental right to do, but people often then look back and ask, how honest was he or she as a journalist? If today they've suddenly decided to join a particular party. And that's as true when CECs do it, or when other senior bureaucrats do it. People often ask those questions looking back. Politicians can write articles and pretend to be journalists. That's more acceptable because all they're doing is op-ed pieces where they're selling viewpoints which journalists also sell.
So Karan Thapar, the journalist, is not a politician. But will Karan Thapar, the journalist, one day become a politician?
If there's a party that's prepared to have me, and that's a huge big if, and if its values, principles, and beliefs are ones that I share, then certainly it's a challenge I would be prepared to consider. I can't give you a cast iron yes or no, but I would certainly be prepared to consider it as a challenge. It might be something that would be worth doing at a particular point in life. But let me tell you, the opposite is equally formidable. If Salman Khurshid, the politician, were one day to decide he wants to become a journalist, you'd be formidable. After today's experience, I can tell you, there are loads of colleagues of mine who'd say to themselves, hallelujah, if this guy becomes a journalist and a TV anchor, our jobs could be at risk.
Well, if you're not good enough to us, I would be applying for a job. But let me just get back to your possible political party that you might join. What special features would you want that party to have?
I'd like it to be a secular party. I'd like it to be a reform-minded party. I'd like it to be a party that has a set of convictions that I would share, that can articulate them intelligently, and that gives its members the freedom of conscience to differ with matters that may not be core issues for the party, so that you have intelligent members rather than slaves and camp followers.
Karan, I think the only party that fits the bill for you is the Congress party, but I know that that would be compromising your integrity and freedom if I said that you ought to join the party. Carry on doing your good work, carry on bashing us, but sometimes when we do something good, give us a smile, give us a pat, it helps. Thank you very much.
Salman, before you go, and I heed your advice completely and I will follow it as truthfully as I can, but there's a side of you the world doesn't know. We know you as a masterful politician, one of the stars of UPA2. I know you, in addition, as a brilliant mimic. You do an Arun Shourie better than anyone else. Go on, do it for me once.
A New Year gift for you then. Okay. Look here, Karan. It is not a matter of whether you join a party or you do not join a party. It is only a question of whether you identify with the ruler or with the ruled. Is that not correct?
Okay. Salman, a pleasure.
Thank you very much and all the best.